Sarah Ellen and I, my wife Sarah Ellen, we went to live in Kenya for a year in the early 90s. This was part of Indiana University partnership with Moi University in Kenya to help bring up a second medical school in Kenya. And we loved that year, 92, 93. And came back on the faculty here, and year 2000 retired. And thought, well, why don't we go back and do one more year of that? So in the year 2000, we went back, and everything had changed. What we thought was going to be another year turned into 20 years. So we got back permanently, really, in March of this year. But the thing that had changed so much was the place was in the grips of the HIV pandemic in a way we did not imagine. We were actually in the epicenter of it. And IU and the program had to make a decision. Do we just go home because this is so much, or do you try to get engaged not just in building a med school, but responding to this pandemic? We chose the latter. And in the midst of that, we started looking for funding, building programs, and I became aware that a major part of what we're running into were large numbers of orphans and vulnerable children as a consequence of so much death and disease from HIV. Our funding really ended up coming from USAID and the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR. And I think it was around the year 2006 or maybe 2007, I don't remember exactly the details, but they let us know that there was new funding available for a private public partnership to respond to orphans and vulnerable children, particularly around one of our clinics, one of our most hard-hit clinics in Chulayimbo. And we looked at the grant and what was involved in it. It's not something we could do. It required more of a public-private partnership. And so we communicated that word back to my home church, North United Methodist Church. And a new name for me, I should remember there, but the name of Ellen Daniels Howell became part of our household words that we just didn't know before. And Ellen got busy. I don't know the details of this, but she a part of developing a partnership of faith communities in the greater Indianapolis area and pondering comparable faith communities in Kenya, and got the idea of putting these two groups together to see if they can work as a team to respond to some of the problems with orphans and vulnerable children. And we're going to craft that into a grant. And they created, I think it was called the Global Interfaith Partnership. And then the name of the program was Umoja. It meant something to me because the word moja is a good Swahili word for one. And anytime you put you in front of a noun, it becomes abstract. So you put a U in front of moja, umoja, it means oneness or unity. And so it's a good name. And Ellen got involved, and I'm sure she had many friends here in the Indianapolis community, trying to conceptualize a grant and respond to this proposal. Flew over to Kenya a time or two. And Sarah Ellen worked with her more than I did, as I was busy doing other things. And the grant became a real focus. It was a reasonable amount of money with which to get started. And had a lot of hope for this. And then I got an email from Ellen that gave me a hint that something more than just a grant was beginning to happen. She says, you know, this dream is bigger than a grant. And I want to say, if we don't get this grant, we're still going to move forward. I was impressed by that. And they did not get the grant, but they did decide to move forward. And I was impressed. And AMPATH kind of went its way, and Umoja kind of went its way. We went separate ways, but close friendship. I don't think there was a single time that a group came from Indianapolis to see the project in Chulambo where they failed to come to Eldoret and sit in our house and chat and share our stories and dreams together. And we grew together. Of course, we have kind of a common home from North United Methodist Church. I'll say a home. I'm more from the balcony than the main level of the church, but it still counts. We were not only together in terms of the dream about responding to the problems in Kenya, we began to see the same country. People living on, many of them on less than $1 a day. I asked every patient I enrolled over these many years, do you have running water? Do you have electricity? Uniformly, no. No one had electricity in their homes. No one had running water. No one had indoor plumbing. It was a struggle to find food for each day, an even larger struggle to be able to educate their children. And I can remember in Turbo, one of the, I think the third or fourth clinic we started, I took a photo of the number of adolescents with HIV. And it just shows maybe 150 adolescents, many of them orphans, burdened by HIV, going through adolescence, and all the struggles of that and all the issues of that. You can only imagine what Umoja was going to come up against, what we were up against at each of these clinics. And I knew that if I had that big a group in Turbo, those working in Chulambo would have 3 or 4 times more, because it's one of the most highest prevalence of HIV of any part of East Africa. And so as time went on, I realized that Umoja and AMPATH were coming back together. We were busy with clinics, practicing medicine, but began to realize you can't do this in a clinic. You have to get out into the village. And you've got to wonder, do people have shelter? You've got to deal with the problem of food security and income security. And as important as anything, you've got to deal with the problems of education. I've worked a few places in different parts of the world. I don't think I've ever been in a place where I've seen young people and families with as much love for education as in Kenya. It means everything. It's kind of the endpoint of every family's dream and every young person's dream is to get an education. And here's this entire population of children who've lost their parents, many of them living with grandparents, a larger number living with the oldest sib as the only caretaker. It's in this setting that AMPATH got more involved in the community, and Umoja really showed the way as they really developed programs that represented feeding for thousands and possibility of moving through high school with some dignity, with proper uniforms and clothes and some hope, and even opportunity for advanced education for those who were ready for it. That was our life story too, and I think really what I'd like to do is just give you an example of a few people that Sarah and I ran into that are very similar to what you do in Umoja. The first one that comes to mind is a little infant. This was in 2008, and I could tell you why I know exactly the date, because this little infant was brought in by the nurse. She had the infant in her arms, and everyone was excited because the child's HIV test came back negative. The mother had HIV, and our effort was to try to treat the mother and prevent the transmission of that virus to that infant at the time of birth. When we started, over 50% of the children were getting infected. And really, as we left, it's less than 3%. But it was so exciting when we would get a negative child in those days. And I looked at the chart held by the nurse, and the name of the baby was Michelle Obama. And the child was born 2 weeks after the inauguration of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. I don't know how many children, particularly in Western Kenya, were named Michelle Obama, but she was my first one. So I just decided to follow up on her some years later because I saw the picture in my files. Where is Michelle? What happened to her? And we found the family and went into the home, both the parents with HIV. And it's a very humble setting. There's just nothing. It's stark. There's no furniture. There's no floor but dirt. No shoes on Michelle. And you kind of look at that and say, where's the hope in this? We thought we'd done the great job by preventing the transmission of the virus. That's not the journey for Michelle. That's just the beginning for Michelle. But then when we follow her to school and take a picture of her in her class and see her in her school uniform and a smile on her face when she's standing next to a blackboard with her name on it, you see nothing but promise and hope. And that is, again, the story of Umoja, is taking that child that's vulnerable, even in the most stark of circumstances, to realize through some training and through education, there's a brightness that can come into that child that represents hope. And in fact, because of that, we've decided to trace as many of the young girls that we could that successfully went through prevention of the virus at birth, find them now and see what kind of problems they're having now and not just be satisfied by what we did with initial treatment. We're going to keep up with Michelle. Another one I'll tell you about is Peter. Totally different kind of story. Peter's from Turkana, the northern part, very hot, desolate part of Kenya, tough life. His mother had HIV and passed it to him. And she ended up dying. And he was passed, he had the virus, but was passed on as kind of, I wouldn't say slave labor, but just sold out to a family down in West Pokot, and his job was to just work all day long for his food, and no one paid any attention to him. And then he was passed to another family in Uganda, again, just to work every day, and just as the only way of getting any food, no one caring for him. After some years, he was passed again back to Kenya. And someone up in West Pokot saw him, knew of us, and sent him to us. And we got his HIV under control. I looked at him, he was probably 17, 18 years old now. I said, Peter, have you been to school? Well, some. And so we didn't know he didn't know what grade he would be in. So we decided to get him tested. He tested for 4th grade. So here's this 17, 18-year-old young man who tests for the 4th grade. Now what do you do? I sat down and I said, look, Peter, I give you 2 options. I'll get a private tutor and give you private lessons until we catch you up to where you can be in a classroom with someone that's a little bit more your age or your size. Or you can go to the 4th grade, just like with the little kids, but just go to school. He thought about it for a day, then he said, I want to go to school. I appreciated his courage. I watched him put on his short pants, his little uniform, and go to elementary school, but he did beautifully year after year. And I'm excited now because Peter's now in high school. The people around him are now more his size. He doesn't have that issue to deal with. His future is there. And I can't talk about Peter without talking about Vital. It's an interesting name, Vital. It's the only Vital I know. He's from around Cholimbo area and went to one of our clinics called Hunyangu. And the thing that happened to Vital, again, picked up the virus from his mother. His mother and father died. He was passed to an aunt some distance from our clinic in Hunyangu. And the feeling was it's just an extra mouth to feed, a child with no future, and she threw his medicine out. Would give him no money to go to clinic and threw his medicine away to just let him die. And Vital would get up and walk by himself for 3 hours by foot to get to our clinic, and 3 hours back, just to get medicine, trying to stay alive, wasted down to nothing. And a social worker got the story, got hold of him and sent him to me. And we put him in a shelter with Peter. And this became their new home, in a shelter in Eldoret. And they became like brothers. Vital he tested in high school. He graduated this last year from high school. We then were able to get him into a program for kind of vocational training, a beautiful program that which working with Purdue University and the engineers there had put together a school for street children. And he was able to get in there and to be trained as an electrician technician. But they're so excited about Vital, they won't let him go. They want him to stay on the faculty. And so Vital's doing beautifully. And then the last one I want to tell you about is Miriam. Totally different story. Miriam, we got to know Miriam because at the time of the clashes, the mini civil war in 2007, 2008. She was up in the mountains of Mount Elgon. It's a huge mountain, the third tallest in Africa. Half is in Kenya, half is in Uganda. And with tribal clashes there, as a small 8-year-old child, she saw her family killed in front of her. She was locked inside of their little hut, and it was set on fire. And some neighbors were able to break down the door and rescue her. She was burned severely, brought to the hospital in Eldoret. And that's where Saralyn, who has worked with children in the hospital, got to know Miriam. And she was hospitalized for 2 years, going through every kind of procedure, trying to get her life back together. And everyone fell in love with Miriam, including us. Well, you'll see, if you get to see the picture of Miriam, this was March of this year, where she has one of her first wigs on that we were able to get with help of friends, because she has so much scar tissue. She can't grow hair. But most of her contractures and things have been surgically released. She did beautifully in high school. She's finished high school. And one of our friends is now sponsoring her. She's been accepted in one of the really wonderful school in Kenya, be trained as a physician assistant, we call clinical officer. So she's really going to be kind of a junior doctor, and she'll be starting school as soon as this COVID pandemic will allow that to happen. But again, you look at it, the stories are all different, but very much the story of what Umoja is about as well, is engaging in the lives of young people at the time of greatest stress, but leading to the possibility of greatest hope. I'd like to say that Sarah and I feel like, oh, we've done something with these young people, but that isn't the story. It's what they've done to us. We are better people now because of each one of these children and so many more. And that's got to be the story of Umoja as well. Those who get involved in Umoja, they're going to find it's not just responding to the need of a child in Africa, but it responds to a need we all have to be part of the global community and part of relieving its pain and our own pain. And I would say anyone who does get involved, it would be important to try to keep up with a child, and maybe you'll hear from them. Remember to smile when they refer to you as mom and dad.